She won most talkative in high school, and she has been running her mouth ever since. Welcome to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast with your host, Lisa Fisher.
Now, this is exciting. Not many podcasts have two hot female farmers, but I just snagged them. So I've got both Natalie and Tara, and we will have to tell the audience, I introduced you separately, but we will have to tell the audience kind of from whence you came and how you got here. So Tara, start with you. What's going on there in New Mexico, and how'd you become a farmer?
Yeah, so I'm actually a fifth generation dairy farmer, and I married
Awesome.
a fifth generation dairy farmer. So there's just a lot of dairy farming going on.
Did y'all go to farmers.com?
We did not.
And what was it called?
Farmers only.
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
I always wanted to find a matchup on that. Dang it. Not for me, but for friends.
No, we actually met when I was 3 and he was 5. And we were not high school sweethearts, nothing like that. We went away to different colleges, and then after college kind of ended up coming back and obviously got married, have 2 girls, and ended up on his family farm here in New Mexico. And then my family farm is just down the road. And I actually got my degree in environmental science.
You're utterly in love.
We are utterly in love.
Sorry.
Lots of good dairy puns.
I know. Low hanging fruit. Go ahead.
I got my degree in environmental science, and I've worked as an environmental consultant in the dairy space for the last 10 years. And then several years back, I started sharing online and just wanted to open up our farm to people who wanted to learn about where their food comes from, and ended up connecting with Natalie. And then, fast forward to where we are now, we have a podcast together called Discover Ag, and I'll let her share about herself, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay. To Natalie, your turn.
Yeah. So like Tara, I also grew up in agriculture, not dairy farming. So no major udder jokes for me, but still in the beef sector. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana. So you can probably cue the Yellowstone jokes if you have any of those you would like to throw out.
Right.
I got my degree in pharmacy, and when I graduated, I really had no intention of coming back to the ranch. I think it's kind of common sometimes with small town kids to think that they're, bigger than the small town they grew up in. And I thought that was me for a while. I thought I needed to get out and go somewhere big and do something bigger. And the thing about farming and ranching is it is a little seed that is placed in your heart. And sometimes, even though you think you have outran it, it stays with you and it kind of calls back to you. So I met my husband, who is a Nebraska rancher. That's how I ended up here in Nebraska, where I am now. And when we got married, I was not working as a pharmacist. So I decided to start a direct-to-consumer beef business. I decided to sell our beef directly to whoever, wanted to buy it. And in order to do that, I knew I had to connect with them on the internet somehow. And so I used Instagram. And like Tara said, that kind of eventually, through, some different twists and turns, led me to her and starting our podcast, Discover Ag.
Awesome. So full disclosure, my podcast is sponsored by a 10th generation of regenerative farmers, and it's Ralston Family Farms, and they're prolific with their rice that they grow, and they use the water from the Arkansas River. And it's an amazing story. And I'm telling you, no one works harder than a family of farmers or ranchers or anybody who's out there in the elements doing what they do to believe in the food that they provide will change your life. And I grew up some in Southeast Arkansas, which has a lot of cotton farming, but I was not raised where food or cattle, or someone may have had a cow on their property, right? And they got milk. But to see this isn't just a hobby. And again, it's your belief system, but it's how you want to change lives. So Tara, when you talk about dairy farming, there's a lot of crap that's available in the stores. So let's talk about how regenerative farming for dairy farmers, it can change your health.
Yeah, so I feel like one of the really cool things about regenerative ag that Natalie and I love to talk about is that it's not just like a check yes and no box. It's not necessarily like a label. It's not a marketing label that you're going to see at the grocery store always. It's really a spectrum where farmers are adapting all sorts of different things. So for us on our dairy farm, we're actually a conventional farm. So our milk just goes to the regular, food supply system. It actually ends up going to cheese. But we get to do all sorts of different practices. We've got, minimal till going on. We compost all of our cow manure, and we can get into all the details of this. But that's what I love about regenerative is it means something different in every area too. So here in Eastern New Mexico, where water is really our main issue, for us, it means focusing a lot on how do we reduce water use? How do we use crops that need less water? How do we maximize the water that we're getting? Whereas, a farmer there in Arkansas, that may not be what their resource
Right.
concerns are. And so regenerative is so amazing in that way that you can really adapt it to whatever your farm is, where your location is, and what's available to you. Like, what are you able to do right here, right now, today? And how are you going to be continually making improvements into the future?
So Natalie, define then regenerative farming.
That's a loaded question, Lisa.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, but like Tara said, it comes down a lot to the practices that the farmers are doing, right? So it's really a mentality. Also, I think it's kind of a mindset of,
okay.
Giving back to the land more than you're taking from it. There's even people who prefer to use the word regenerative in place of sustainable, because sustainable means, right, we're kind of keeping it the same, you're sustaining it, whereas regeneration means you are actually improving it. So a lot of it comes down to, like Tara said, different practices we can do to better, whether it's our land, our animals. Common practices you could hear people refer to would be like no tilling, because a lot of regeneration is centered around the soil. So it's going to be like, what can we do to best, get that really good, healthy soil? No tilling, planting cover crops, doing things with water conservation. We do a lot on our land, our ranch, with our local NRCS. So we're planting, butterfly habitats. We're doing things for wildlife.
Awesome.
So it really depends on like what part of ranching and farming you're in that the practices you're going to be. But really, it's that mentality of doing really, really good things that improve the land instead of just taking from the land.
Well, I know the Ralstons, that's because I've been a part of their press conferences and other things. Yeah, I've had a relationship with them a long time. And I know the no-tilling is something they mention, but I've never understood, why aren't we tilling? Like, is tilling a bad thing?
That's such a good question. So one of the things about, Natalie mentioned that regenerative ag is really that soil health. And one of the things about regenerative ag is planting cover crops. And so you want basically to like keep as much biomass, like plants, on the soil as long as possible. And by tilling, you can be like breaking up that organic matter, those plants, and so not keeping it on there. So what we do is we try to be as minimal till as possible. Sometimes there's instances where we need to till, and that's what makes sense. But if you can be minimal till, you're just taking that equipment across that land less times and less disturbance. And for us, our cover crops are actually what we call double cropping, where we're able to get a winter crop and a summer crop off. But that way, year round, there are plants in the ground. There's something in the soil holding that soil down, just keeping that like activity. You really think about the soil as being like alive, and you want it to have all of these different, microorganisms and things going on under the surface. And one of the cool things, obviously, about cow manure is that it actually can increase organic matter. And organic matter is like everything to soil. The more organic matter you have, the healthier your soil is. And cows play such an important part in that organic matter.
Well, we'll talk about our friends, the cows, in just a minute. But so tilling then interrupts the ecosystem, and we're trying to preserve it. Was that the best way to explain that?
Yeah, I feel like that's probably a simplified version, definitely, of kind of what's going on. And when you break up that soil, you can also be like releasing some of the water, like the water could be drying up. You're disturbing what's going on there.
You can also release carbon too, which I don't know if you've heard carbon in the news at all, or people's focus on carbon.
Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, but that's another thing too, is that carbon can be stored in soil. It's a carbon sink, actually, our land is. That means it can like take it in. It's one of the few things. That's why agriculture, we always advocate for it as being part of this, part of the solution, part of the answer instead of the problem, is because we're an industry that can actually take down that carbon that is floating around in the air. And so tilling can kind of disturb and kind of mess with that process as well.
Do you all feel threatened? These are not political questions. I don't want anyone to think, but it gets to politics. Bill Gates bought up a whole bunch of Arkansas farmland. Is that encroaching on you in either state? I mean, is it something that we really are dealing with?
This is a really good question. It's something we actually have covered multiple times now on our podcast because it is such a complicated topic,
Right.
and it's beyond, Bill Gates. For some reason, Bill Gates is always the one that ends up in the news. Jeff Bezos actually owns more farmland in the United States than Bill Gates.
Wow.
And then, we also see certain countries in the news about buying farmland. But
China.
yes, but what's
Yeah.
funny is the China is not even in the top 5 countries of owning the most farmland. It's actually the Netherlands and Canada, which when you really look at the ag food system, not that surprising. There is a lot of influence from the Netherlands and from Canada, and just lots going on in that space. So it's interesting that it's always, the China and Bill Gates people that make the news, when really there's a lot of other players in this kind of global market, this global ag system.
What about, Natalie, then in Europe, though? I'm trying to think, was it the Netherlands that they're kind of quashing farming, and it may be against the law, and I may be overstating that, but that's how that's been communicated to me. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's another great topic that we actually covered on our podcast. So for anyone listening, I guess maybe we could break down our podcast and then it would make sense of why
Yes.
we keep saying we're covering all these things.
Great.
But what we do is actually take the top 3 kind of trending topics, most important topics that are in the news that week that make headlines, that are, people that we think are going to be curious about. And then we break them down from like our, millennial farming perspective. And so yeah, we've covered a lot of these, like you said, these newsworthy things that keep popping up. And definitely the Netherlands is kind of the first that comes to mind, that is under, I think, some strict government, policy changes that would really affect farming for them. But not far behind them is places like New Zealand. I think Ireland really made headlines recently with culling a bunch of cattle that we talked about too. So there's definitely a push. Tara and I like to describe it that we are becoming a society that is very carbon tunnel focused and also very methane. Methane gets brought into the conversation a lot with cattle. And so we're really, really focused on, cutting down those emissions, which that's great. Like that would have an improvement, certainly, right? If we're decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, but we're almost losing sight of some of the effects of, what that would be doing to our farming and food. The actual implications of cutting down the greenhouse gas emissions, is it going to be as big as we think it is? I mean, these are very complicated ripple effects we could be having when we start trying to mess with our food system. And so we're really, in Tara and I's opinion, kind of getting out of balance when it comes to putting these restrictions on farmers in an attempt to just kind of decrease the emissions.
It's the proverbial throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, it's a source of, well, obviously I have an opinion. It's a source of life and so many other things. And the reason it surprises me that in Ireland, because, some of the best cheese and dairy you get is in Ireland. So we're not going to travel there because I want a scone with some clotted cream, and I'm not going there if they're going to act pissy about it. So why would they? So I guess they have a political system in place that thinks farting cows are the threat.
Yeah. And, it makes sense that they'd be going after some of these places because they have the highest emissions, right? But if you think about it intuitively, the most productive places are going to have emissions, right? And that's one thing that we talk about and we're concerned about is if we reduce production in places that are very efficient, very good, have high quality, we have to offset those somewhere else, right? Like someone has to pick up the slack. We're not eating less meat, we're not eating less dairy, and we're not going to. Like those are not trends that are predicted in society by any means. And we're, what will that be for other places who have to pick up the slack of, let's say Ireland, great. They cut down on their emissions. Ireland's personal emissions are now decreased in the eyes of, the global, I guess, comparison. Someone else is picking it up. If they don't have as high of standards, they don't have as high efficiency or production, it's like we could actually be having worse, greenhouse gas emissions in the long run. Like if somewhere else has to pick it up that is not as good, we could see numbers increase even more. And so there's a lot of concern about picking some of these high productive places and putting kind of a target on their back. It also, I think, could affect research, right? Some of these leading places, if they are, again, leading in these areas, if they're going to be cutting back and down, what does that mean for our improvements? What does that mean for the future? What does that mean for things like we can progress on and work on if they're not going to be doing it anymore?
So we've all seen, as my friend says, he read it on TikTok. Because, you used to say I read it in the paper. Now you go, oh, I saw it on TikTok, but I read it on TikTok. Those of us who have the philosophy that cows are good God made the cows, and that dairy and beef are obviously the staple of my diet. I have a meat-based diet. That's what I eat. And some rice, local fruits in season. Pretty boring, right? But with that, we've seen the videos of, or I really have read this in actual words too, that by eliminating the meats that people think are so evil, that all the animals that are killed, all the insects in the parts, however, the ecosystem that is damaged when more plants are produced. And in order to produce the plants that's making Kim Kardashian's fake meat burger, which we know she's not eating, I mean, whatever, that it really does more harm than good. Tara, can you kind of expound on that?
Yeah, I can start and I'll let Natalie jump in too, because I think she has some great examples there in Nebraska. But yes, I think there is this misconception that if you're eating plants, you're eating like, out of somebody's garden, when in reality, like most of our plants are mechanical harvested. There's real farming, like it's industrial farming as well, to harvest an entire field of lettuce or an entire field of watermelons or whatever it is. You're disrupting that soil, just like we talked about with the no-till or the tilling. You're disrupting that field. You're having to make it, perfectly level. You're having to get all of the right, fertilizer applications to grow whatever fruit or vegetable you want to talk about. And yeah, I think, the plant-based burger that is being pushed so hard, that's based out of soy production. Take a look at that. I mean, and that's not to say like it just, when there's the argument made, Natalie and I really believe in food choice. Like if people want to make the choices they want to make, that's great. But don't tell us like that soy-based burger is better for the environment or healthier for us, because those are two things that are not true.
Natalie, your self-control is impressive, because I know you want to say something.
No, Tara touched on some really great points when it comes to people's, I think, perceptions. And I honestly, I think the way the media has kind of portrayed plants versus animal proteins and kind of started almost skewing, the common mindset we have about how it's better, cleaner, greener, all of these adjectives. We like to call it greenwashing, these marketing terms to try and, get people to buy certain things. But for better or worse, I do think that there was a movement somehow established around like plant-based eating and how that's more wholesome and better. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Circling back to our conversation about greenhouse gas emissions, there's a really great study that shows the statistic: if we all went vegetarian or plant-based, we would only decrease the greenhouse gas emissions by 6%. So it's less than 3%, which again, great. That's an impact. We're not denying that, but I don't think that is really the impact people think they're having when they're going, Meatless Monday or cutting it from their diets completely. And on the same, flip side of the coin, we would see a calorie increase and a nutrient decrease, right? And I think we're at a place in America we can all agree that, Tara and I like to say we have a very safe, affordable, and abundant food system, but maybe we have some choices out there that aren't the healthiest choices out there. I don't think we need more calories in our diet as Americans. I think we need more nutrients. And so we also get really concerned that, when people are pushing this plant-based diet or these plant-based narratives, that we could be doing some major harm, especially to, pregnant women, growing children, a lot of these bodies that need the full nutrients.
Have you seen, even with the nursing homes now, they're pushing more toward plant-based, which as a health coach, I can tell you that ladies, after you hit 40, you need to increase your protein intake. And protein is typically from a meat product. I know you can't get some alternatives, but you would not be able to get the needs for your body. And the last thing your grandmother needs to do is to break her hip in that nursing home, because then she has 6 weeks, 6 months, or a year to live after that. So you prevent the broken hip, as we know, with weightlifting, sunlight, and protein. I mean, it's just, to me, it's just very, very simple. In New York, when the mayor, for one thing, the mayor is going to throw out wood-fired ovens, and the guy from Barstool Sports, I think that's the name of that account. He's a real funny guy. All he does is go from city to city, going to pizza restaurants. And so he threw all the pizzas over the mayor's gate, because of course he's at a gated property there, to say, you're not doing this to us. So that's one thing. But then when they did start pushing Meatless Mondays, I'm not kidding. My heart hurt, because the trickle down effect. Now, I will say, now we're not talking politics. I know we're not, but there are red states and blue states, right? I mean, I think That should be taught in civics now. There are red states and blue states. I am in a red state, and a red state to me means freedom. I don't care what the rest of you think. It means freedom and autonomy. So I don't think that's going to be a threat to us in Arkansas. But what about Nebraska? I would say is a red state, a rural state like Nebraska. New Mexico would be. What are you? Are you a red state or blue state?
Typically more blue, but we just depends on the year, but probably leaning more blue.
Okay. So, but rural communities we know are typically, and I say that in a political way only of if you want government making choices for you or you want freedom. And that's what we're talking about. I just want the freedom to choose whether or not I take a certain vaccine or I eat a certain food. I don't care what y'all do. I really don't. I just want the freedom. So do you feel threatened at all, Tara, with your farm or that the schools may cut down meats on Mondays because as a conventional farmer, that will affect your bottom line?
Yeah, so that's a really good that's a really good question. For me, looking at some of these states that have reduced, they have the Meatless Monday and they have like the Vegan Friday. What really concerns me, and I think we've heard this from a lot of registered dietitians as well, is that for a lot of kids, like this is not going to hurt the kids that go home and have a home cooked meal or a big meal every single dinner. This is going to hurt the kids that are in underserved communities and houses that are struggling already. And you think about the days they picked as well, Monday and Friday. So those kids, I mean, you talk to teachers about this, like we've had a lot of conversation. They are not getting a high protein meal on Monday or on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday, and Monday. So their only days to get animal protein are the 3 days in the middle. That is really a detriment to their, developing brains. I mean, there's been so many different groups that have come out, whether it be groups of registered dietitians, pediatricians, saying the main things that kids need to be eating, like the plant-based milks, do not compare nutritionally to cow's milks. And so unless you are supplementing your diet in other ways, which we know even kids that may be from more affluent communities, they're picky eaters. They're not always the best eaters. And so if you can get them to drink a glass of milk that is cow's milk, you're getting a lot of nutrients. Or if you're getting them to eat a few bites of steak, that is a nutrient powerhouse for those kids. And so to deprive them of those nutrients is just absolutely a disservice to those communities.
I was going to say, Lisa, it's really interesting that you actually went to politics, because you would think that food should be something that is not divided, right? Each side should stand for food choice. It should be, I feel like it should unite us, as a nation. But it seems to be doing the opposite. I feel like it's gotten really out of control, actually. And it really, as you said earlier, it breaks your heart when you think about it, because I do feel like, animal proteins and some of the diet choices have turned into almost a political thing. And I think that's really, really unfortunate. But it is interesting because I think more and more people are starting to realize how that's been used, maybe marketing or different things. We also covered, Mayor Adams and some of his decisions on the podcast, and we've kind of talked about that a couple different times. And I can remember going to one of the first YouTubes that was put up about, him doing kind of the press release, and I think it was like a hospital setting. And the comments on there were overwhelmingly against, a narrative of a mayor choosing a diet for a city. I'm sure New York is a blue state. I don't actually really know.
The city, wait a minute. I was just there in Albany doing some TV commercials. And so that's the capital. And, you're bailing up to the bar, talking to people there, and it comes out. Politics, y'all, comes out in all conversations. Mm-hmm. I'm not inviting it. And the people there were saying, we are New York City is a blueberry in a red state, and so is Albany. State capitals are often, she said, blue, but these were farmers. So you don't think of New York. You think of New York City and New York State, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's the Adirondacks. This is the Catskills. Mm-hmm. This is Jewish communities. It is a lot of different religious communities that rely on the land. And they said, we are all against what they're doing in Manhattan and here in our capital. So that really opened my eyes. They said, though, we do come out as blue when we vote en masse as a group, but they said there are so many people who are here for freedom. So it really surprised me.
Yeah. But, to that point, even the people within the, New York, like you said, the blueberry, they were not liking the video. So I think people are starting to recognize that food choice is, a unifying thing and something most people are standing for.
Well, I do think COVID is what started changing the fact that that's the first time in our lives we were told we didn't have a choice. We did. And businesses were told they didn't have a choice. So they closed up shop, which is against your constitutional rights. I mean, we can argue that all day. So that is what we're at the level of the frogs in warm water, and it's about to boil. And the frog, you know what I'm saying? And if we're not paying attention, and if not just paying attention, I hope people wake up, right? Hope people wake up. But I also hope they start going to their Albany, their Little Rock. Is Santa Fe the capital of
Yep.
New Mexico? Oh,
Yep.
one of my favorite cities.
Oh, it's a great one.
What's the capital of Nebraska? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Lincoln.
Lincoln. That's right. I remember third grade geography or whatever that was. But people need to start speaking up to say, you can have rules for you. And as for me and my house, the Bible says, as for me and my house, I'm going to have a steak for dinner tonight and some eggs. So no, I think you all need to keep speaking up. Have you felt like your voice has been stifled at all? Because, now AI is, that's who's monitoring our conversations and the posts we make. Do you feel like at all someone's put a thumb on you to tell you to zip it?
This is such a good question too. You're hitting a lot of good points that we've never been asked about before.
I've done this for a long time.
I love it.
And I have a sincere interest in what we're talking about.
Yes. Yes. It's very obvious. We got a lot of passion here going on. And this is something Natalie and I are also very passionate about. But going back kind of actually to your COVID point before I answer your question, I think that COVID was a big turning point. And I heard a quote, I love to share it. It was about like how it was a very pivotal moment and how farmers needed to take that pivotal moment in our history and really like talk about agriculture. It was the first time with COVID that, massive disruptions in our food supply chain and that people were kind of stopping and wondering where their food came from. And so I do think that there has been a massive shift of people being more curious in where their food is coming from, wanting to connect directly with farmers. And I think farmers have been kind of delivering on that. I feel like there's a lot of farmers sharing on social and trying to get out there. I feel like farmers markets have become a really like thriving place for people to go out. And so I love that feeling of kind of the pendulum swinging in the other direction now of people going the opposite, as Natalie said. Like there's a lot more conversation, I feel like, than there were 5 years ago around where your food is coming from and what you need to know and the questions you should be asking. And that has been, I don't know, really positive to see. As a person who's shared online for, over 7 years now, it is cool to see it coming back around to agriculture and to, cattle being an important piece in our diets.
Are you moms, you two?
Yeah. Yes, we're both moms.
Okay, you're both moms. Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking of the threat of someone. I mean, my kids are grown now. I have grandchildren, though, and thinking of just the school lunch thing. Oh, I can't cuss on this podcast, but it's a... Darren, will you beep this out? It's a show. There, Darren, beep that out. Darren will beep that out. But there's no other way to describe, if you've walked through, thank you, he's nodding his head, yes, you are. What the lunches that are available for these kids and the crap that's being served and the fact that they give low-fat milk. Y'all, do you know
I was about to say, you're hitting on a really hot topic for me right now.
It absolutely makes me nutty. Do you know what an outlier I am when I have a milk dealer here. I've got her pager number and we meet at the Kroger parking lot and I Venmo her. I really do. But sometimes if she doesn't have yogurt available, she does kefir for me and whatever I need. But, if I run out. So I was at the grocery store. Now it's easier at like a Fresh Market or Whole Foods. It's more of a specialty store. But at Garden Variety Kroger, 0% fat, 0% fat, 0% fat. I'm digging in the yogurt because I put my local fruits and berries in season, in my yogurt. And I make sure, because I'm trying to get a lot of protein. Because, I'm 100 years old, as I told y'all before we started. But with that, do you know how hard it is? It's hard for me to find unsweetened tea at the grocery store because it's all sweetened with fake sweetener. So it's 0 calories, whatever. It's poison. It's poison, people. But no one's looking for unsweetened tea. It's always the green label, typically. And then high-fat yogurt. Do you know? I mean, what are we doing? I mean, are they demanding? You're the person to ask, Tara. Are they coming to the conventional farmer saying, I am looking for a cow that's got 1% body or 1% fat in it or 0%? Is that what the people are demanding?
Yeah, it's so crazy because actually we're paid on components, and so components is the butter, like the fat in the milk. So the better the fat, the butter fat, actually the more
I'm
we're
making you
paid.
rich. I'm making you rich then.
But then they take it out, which is what's so wild.
That's
Like, why
the
are we taking it
dumbest
out?
thing.
But it is crazy. I am a really big advocate of whole fat yogurt. I have a younger daughter who really has to get calories in, and we have decided, I mean, we want good calories, right? Like, we don't, I
Right.
mean, there's plenty of junk food calories out there, but we would like her to be eating really great calories and really great fats. And it is really difficult to find full fat yogurt. And the school system thing is just wild. It's wild to me that, milk gets labeled up there with like Coca-Cola. And, milk has a lot of, it has naturally occurring fats and sugars. Why are we taking those out for kids? And what's even crazier is if we would leave the fats in, even chocolate milk, which people have different feelings about chocolate milk, but chocolate milk can be a great alternative.
It's delicious.
Yeah, and kids that drink
Love
chocolate
it.
milk are less likely to drink soda pop, which
Right.
that's a win in my mind.
Yeah.
But you don't need as much sugar in something if you have more fat. The more fat you take out, the more you have to replace it with something else, which ends up being sugar. And it is just really wild that we have to have skimmed milk in schools. Like, I can't, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, what planet are we living in that we think that full fat milk is what's causing kids to have a problem?
Well, and Tara and I were just talking about this on the podcast recently because last week we actually kind of deep dive sugar subsidies, which is a very interesting topic. And we were talking about how right now I feel like in society they're villainizing some of the foods we've eaten for the longest, right? So meats, milks, yogurts, and dairies, and they're blaming all of that on these health problems that are not necessarily, health problems we maybe experienced a long time ago. And it's like, if we really looked at our food system and what could be causing some of these problems, it is not, going to be those whole nutrient dense foods, which puts me on my soapbox that I kept thinking about when you guys were talking. Personally, mine is food labels. I really think our food labels in America have really gone off rails. I think they started in a really good place, a really good idea to help consumers be able to source the product that they are no longer growing themselves, because that's how society has moved to. We've moved to 2% growing for 100%, and that's just where we are. So
wow,
if you're going to be shopping and not making your own food, you're naturally going to have questions about it. So great solution. Let's label it so that people can better understand what they're buying. But I don't really think that's what labels are about anymore. I don't think they're really invested in helping consumers understand. I think they've really gone too far into marketing, buying, greenwashing. Like, it's kind of a disaster when you can pull the, general Americans and we think that the fortified cereal is healthier for you than, grabbing the steak. And just a lot of these labels
don't
are
eat
misleading.
Cereal. Here, I'll help you with that. Don't eat cereal.
And it's not at fault. I mean, I just feel so empathetic for the shoppers, because it's like they're not growing the food. They don't know. The labels are telling them one thing, headlines are telling them another. And it's like very overwhelming to step in the grocery store and even try and source something healthy for your family and your kids when you feel so overwhelmed and you see TikTok videos saying this is going to kill you, and another TikTok video that this is going, this is causing this disease and stay away from this. It's like we compiled a TikTok or a reel on our Discover Instagram that basically shows the juxtaposition of someone saying like, only eat meat. No, plants are killing you. Don't buy milk. This is doing it's like, what do you even buy anymore? Because everything is so overwhelming, and it's fear mongering. Like, fear mongering has taken over our food system.
I get a lot of pushback because I am a certified health coach, and been on the intermittent fasting lifestyle since 2017. So we were with an older lady the other day, and my husband and I were going to eat our one big meal on Saturday that we eat. Sometimes we have one meal a day sometimes. And we were leaving, and she said, "Oh, you're a health coach?" Yeah, I've known her for a long time. And she said, "So where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to eat a steak." I don't know about him, but I'm going to have a steak. And she goes, "But I thought you were a health coach." See, to her, that you couldn't have both. She was like, how can that be healthy? But what about your cholesterol? I mean, I get that pushback so much. I was just interviewed on a radio station here recently, and it was men. And when I tell men you never have to eat another salad, they want to come home with me. I mean, they're like, I don't know who your husband is, but he's lucky. I said, you don't have to eat another salad. Have another piece of steak or some cheese, because then the pushback was on that radio show, what about cholesterol? And I said, give me an hour and I'll explain to you all the science. But now the three of us know it's bought and paid for, and that food labels are bought and paid for, because food labels, we are fatter than we've ever been. We exercise. We have more gyms. There are more workout facilities on every corner in every city, right? And there are more food labels telling us, well, New York was the one that banned big sodas. See, again, let me make my choice. If I want to have a big soda and a cigarette, let me have it. I'm not going to, but it's my body, my choice. So the food labels and the whole calorie count, that's another thing, I guess, and I'm sure you all would agree with me. Stop counting calories. I mean, eat real food, and I have no idea. I mean, when I say I don't know what I eat in calories, calorically, I don't. I just know that I have a steak waiting for me downstairs and a cup of yogurt and some cheese. And I don't know what that means. Is anyone asking about calories anymore?
Yeah, I think that the whole entire conversation around nutrition and what people like, how to lose weight, it is a wild world out there. And I have to agree with you. I feel like if you eat whole foods, it's definitely less of a concern to be counting calories. And that's not to say like you gorge yourself. I mean, everything within limitation. But if you're eating whole foods, you're going to have to eat a lot of whole foods to overeat calories. When you think about all of the things that are added to all of the different processed foods, it's just crazy. And so it is. I think it's so much easier to watch your weight or just be in a healthy weight when you're eating whole foods. I know, like for me, I've lost 10 pounds in the last year, and my focus has been on making sure I'm eating more whole foods. More whole foods and 30 grams of protein at every meal, and then more protein. And
that's great.
I mean, that's been my biggest change, like those two things.
That's awesome.
And it wasn't that I was, overly obese before, but just that made me get back in the range I wanted to be in.
The other really interesting thing with where we're at in food and society right now is whether it's social media or headlines or news or what it is, I do feel like we're at a point where it's really hard to unring a bell. And, that is a big problem. Like when you even just talked about like animal proteins and cholesterol, like
right.
There's been a lot of study, a lot of people communicating about that, a lot of people talking about that, and yet we cannot get out of people's minds like, but what won't my cholesterol raise? Isn't that bad? Same thing with heart disease. They did a really good job ringing the bell of, red meat and heart disease. And even though, again, more and more information comes out and more studies and more health professionals talking about how that, isn't true or not a concern, or this is what it actually means when we're like breaking down what the study means. It means not 5 times more, it's 5% of the increase. So it's really only one, whatever that actually means when you look at the scientific study. It's like people just cling to that original statement, and then it's like live or die by it. And it's really, really hard to unring those bells from our food system standpoint, especially when it comes to like our animal proteins.
We could talk about cholesterol forever because I mean that they're throwing a flare so that we're running after that when it's, we say in the meat-based community, stop blaming beef for what sugar has done. Cut your sugar out, then let's look at your lab work. Things, as we know, things improve. The other thing that you might know this, Tara, but the science behind why you've lost some weight was and you may know this, we have satiety hormones. So Dr. Jason Fung says that he's the father of intermittent fasting. We're hormonally wired to eat and to stop eating. So your hormonal wiring to eat is when you eat low fat, diet foods, packaged foods. And I'm not saying you were doing that, but whatever you did, you've replaced it more with foods that provide more satiety. The foods that provide satiety, they only provide satiety. Packaged foods don't. And Dr. Ben Bickman says if you buy it with a barcode in a bag or a box, the science is it won't. Trust the science, remember? It won't provide satiety. So the satiety hormone, cholecystokinin and peptide YY, only fire if you've had fat and protein. What is steak? Fat and protein. What is cheese? Fat and protein. What's milk? Fat and protein. Salmon is fat and protein, but those white flaky fishes that don't have much fat, we're not going to give much punch. And that's why people say, well, I ate Chinese food and I was hungry 2 hours later, because China has it's more, the majority of that is more carb, only this much is protein, right? And little is fat. So that's why, because the hormones, that literally is your bell that rings, in your brain that says you're finished. And once you start addressing that, then all of a sudden you push away. And it's this, what you all know is, if I told you to eat a bag of potato chips, well, the Lay's, it says on there, you can't eat just one, because they've spent billions in research and development, billions to trick you. But you would never eat 3 fully loaded baked potatoes with butter, cheese, bacon, salt, pepper, and sour cream. You would get sick. Why? Because your cholecystokinin and your peptide YY would fire, and you couldn't eat anymore. So you see, it's your hormonal wiring that keeps you slim.
Food is really interesting when you start diving into like the emotional part of how our brain is wired with it. And then when you start talking about the chemical things, like the way, like you said, our body is, chemically wired to respond to food. It gets really, really interesting.
Wired, right.
When you start breaking down the things that we release, the way we view it. It's just it's really interesting when you start thinking about some of your habits, why you have them. I listened to a really interesting podcast that was talking about what you just said. They call it bliss points in food, where we have put, each food has its own bliss point, where it's the perfect amount of sugar, fat, carbs, all of that, so that it is, perfectly designed for us to just consume, and almost to the point of addiction. And so, it can be fascinating to deep dive into a lot of that stuff.
Well, that's the hyperpalatability that research and development from Lay's potato chips or General Mills or wherever that are, hey, people, they're also subsidized. Those foods are also subsidized. So they're double dipping, and farmers are out here barely making it. I'm running for office, dang it. Okay.
We're ready to vote for you. We're going. We're signing up.
Thank you. Okay. Now here's something I need to understand better, because I think there's a taste difference, but I really prefer my grain finished beef better than my grass finished beef, right? But am I going to die because I'm eating grain fed cows? Because we have them here and they're delicious. So tell me the difference.
That is a very good question, as Tara likes to say. I feel like Tara said that before, after every question you have asked.
I know, so I'm sorry.
No, I love it. More. No.
Yeah. So here, I'll break down the difference. And I think it will surprise listeners, because I do not think it will be as big of a difference as you think it is.
Okay.
So the way our beef system is built, the easiest way I can explain it is to think of an hourglass. So at one end, you have very big, wide. It is operations like my husband and I's. It's called a cow-calf operation. There's over 700,000 of them in the US, and they are all family owned. And the average herd size is only about 43. So very small, very family owned. Something I think consumers would really love about our beef system, right? That's the big, wide open top of the hourglass. As we work down into the beef system, from the way the cattle works, is the beef sector is a little bit different than like chicken or pork, in that it is not owned by the same person from beginning to end. So pork and chicken are vertically integrated. An easy way to think of that is like Tyson would own the chicken from the egg all the way to the very end.
Here we are, Tyson, Arkansas.
All owned by Tyson. Yep.
Right.
Beef system, we are not like that. We are, again, we'll have the independent ranches at the beginning. We sell our calf to the next stage, which is called the backgrounder. The backgrounder then sells it to the next stage, which people would often hear as the feedlot. And then the feedlot sells it to the packer. And that is how you're working down into the hourglass. The packer is what you'll hear as the big four. We only have big four packer, who dominates over 80% of processing in the US. That is the oligopoly that people like to talk about.
Right.
It's a big thing. That is right at the center of the hourglass where nothing can get through. That's our chokehold. Then we come out on the other side, and it goes to like restaurants, grocery stores, and then the consumers, right? So it goes back out into the big, nice hourglass. The thing about grass finished and grain finished is all of them start on ranches like my husband and I. So all of them are going to be out at pasture on grass with their mothers, drinking milk all the way up until they're sold to that feedlot stage. Again,
how
sometimes
old is
that
that?
backgrounder stage too. It's usually a weight, actually, and not an age.
Okay.
So it'll just vary, and it can change hands and go to the background, or it can go change hands. There's just some different things that could work depending where you are, the size that enter the feedlot, etc. They spend only about 4 to 6 months at the feedlot stage if you are getting grain finished. So a grass finished will not have any grain in its diet. It means that's what the label means. It's a grass finished. It had grass only for its diet for the entire life. I think a lot of people like to take the grass finished label and make it an animal welfare label, and it is not. It does not mean it was treated better because it was given grass versus grain. It is not an animal welfare. It's not a nutrition. All it is a diet label. It is simply telling you that the animal was fed entirely grass for its lifetime. So the grain finished, they're going to be like the grass. They're going to start out for about 2/3 of their life out at pasture. They get sold to that feedlot and they enter the feedlot, which typically the grass finished don't. They're going to be grass finished on a ranch, out at pasture. They can be in a barn. That's also like a common misconception. So another common misconception is that it didn't receive antibiotics or added hormones.
Okay.
It still can. It's grass finished just means it got grass. Okay.
Okay.
So the grain finished for those 4 to 6 extra months, actually less because it takes longer to finish grass finish. But so those 4 to 6 months of its life, it will get grain added into its diet. It still is getting grass though, which I think people think that it's just got corn its entire life, or it's just eating corn on the cobs or something. And that's not true. It's grain that has been added to grass. So it's just part of their diet. And there's a study out of Oklahoma State actually that when they looked at the entire lifespan, the amount of grain consumed by a grain finished animal is only about 7%. So it really is minuscule. I think it's something that's gotten maybe a little bit out of control with, people's perceptions of what a grain finished cattle means. But really it's just that they got a little extra corn grain in their diets that the grass didn't. It fattens them up. It gives them that marbling. That's why you like the taste better, is because that's what the grain does versus the grass.
So your cattle is both, or one or the other?
So our cattle will be at the very top. So we sell it and then we don't know where it goes,
that's right.
who buys it, what it, ours is going to enter the conventional supply chain. So if I was a grass finished operation, I would typically hold on to it. And most grass finished operations in the US are probably going to be direct to consumer, honestly. They're just not a ton. We actually import our grass fed that you would see at the grocery store. I don't want to give that as a hard rule, but most of the grass fed, when you're thinking large scale in the US, is actually imported. So a lot of grass finished operations are direct to consumer. So for our operation, our job is to, raise really healthy calves that are sold off to eventually, enter the backgrounding, enter the feedlot stage, and then get harvested and sent off to grocery stores.
Okay, Tara, since you can be a little more objective, since you don't have a cow in this game, then why am I pushing so much for local beef if they're still maybe getting antibiotics and there might be glyphosate in the soil?
Yeah, so Natalie is a big advocate of direct to consumer if you choose to go that route, because it does support that family. It means a lot to that family. Dairy is just so different. Like Natalie was talking about how beef is so different than poultry and pork, hogs, and then dairy is this whole other beast that's completely different than the other ones. A lot of times when we talk about animal protein, we lump them all together when in reality they're very different. So from a dairy standpoint, if you buy the regular conventional milk at your grocery store, it typically comes from a farm less than 100 miles from you, and it takes less than 48 hours to get from the farm to the grocery store. So it is a very localized system. Actually, one of the most local products you can get at your grocery store is your regular old conventional milk.
All right.
I can answer your question though, Lisa.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I do love to encourage people to support, local if they can, if that's within their budget and something they, way they want to shop. I think it's a really good thing to do. Like Tara said, I always like to point out how much it means to a direct to consumer operation, because it's not easy to implement. It's a lot easier to sell it's a lot easier to follow the conventional supply chain that we have set up than what some of the producers are doing. It's also really important if you care about supporting US producers. As I said, we have a very goofy thing in, I don't know if you've heard of this, but in our food system, when it comes to beef, made in USA label does not technically mean it was animals that were raised here. They could have been raised elsewhere and imported. It just means they were harvested here, which is a very confusing. Yeah, no, it's not. And it comes up pretty much with every
administration.
Thank you. Administration to combat that and change that. But it's part of NAFTA, and there's things with Mexico and Canada that really make it. That's why where
NAFTA.
we are with
Yeah,
it.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
If you really want to know that you are, supporting a U.S. farmer and rancher and you're consuming 100% U.S. Beef, then the best option to ensure that is, again, local farmer and rancher.
Got it.
The other benefit is you could ask them questions. So you could ask them, like, if you are concerned about GMOs, which is a conversation very deep conversation. I'm not sure we want to go down that rabbit hole, but if you are a consumer that is concerned about, maybe pesticides or herbicides or GMOs or some of those things, you would be able to ask the farmer and rancher, are you spraying? What are your practices?
Got it.
Where are you sourcing their hay from? Where are you sourcing their corn from? And you would have those questions that you would never, ever, ever be able to get from a label at the grocery store. So there's a lot of benefits to, shopping local, buying local, and supporting that option. But same token, I stand by the beef we raise every single day. I show it on social media. I'm proud of our operation, and I know that my operation isn't much different than a lot of ranches across the nation. So I want people to still feel good going into the grocery store and buying beef that is in the grocery store too.
Well, Dr. Saladino always says, if budget is a concern, grab the ground beef from the grocery store and start there.
Oh, yes, that's the other thing. You just triggered me. A big difference that I want to make sure I highlight for people so they know. When you're buying direct to consumer, you are getting one cow and one cow only, which isn't much of a difference when you think of your whole cuts. So like your steaks in the grocery store, everything's graded on, like select prime choice.
Yes.
So that's going to be, for the most part, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference between a prime steak you buy at the grocery store and a prime steak. I mean, it's been graded, right? So theoretically, it should be the same. The big difference, though, is grocery store beef is a melded product. So it's going to be a lot of animals combined into one.
Whereas
For the ground beef.
For the ground beef. Yep. For ground beef products.
Got it.
Whereas ground beef that you are buying direct from your rancher is going to be one cow and one cow only. So that is also a really big difference between grocery store and direct to consumer beef.
Here's my cooking tip of the year. I'm doing ground brisket now. My cattle farmer is doing ground brisket. Y'all, it is so good because
I'm
there's...
going to up you one, Lisa, and challenge you to you should add organs to your ground.
I do.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Don't tell my family.
Okay. What stays on the podcast happens on the podcast. Or what happens on the podcast stays on the podcast.
So how I circumvent that, because, I do have to doctor that up more. So if I get the ground beef with the organ meats, one of my Lisa's recipes is I cook it down and if you want onion and garlic and all the things, right? Depending if they bother you or not, because we know that there are anti-nutrients in some of these foods. So everybody, that's one thing about diet. It is very subjective and it's very individual, bioindividuality, right? So, but with that, I cook it down with the organ meats. I use cumin and a lot of spices. And then I put it over and I've done this before with the Ralston family. I've been up to their facility and we did a YouTube segment. And I cook it put it over their rice that I cook in my bone broth, so I'm getting the value of the collagen there. And then I get my local cheese and sour cream. And if you want tomatoes and other things on it, you doctor that thing up and you don't know it has organ meats. If you don't do that, and if you're bothered by the bite, you'll notice there's a definite bite to it. Some people, there are 1 or 2 people out of a million who like liver without a gun to their head.
The Liver King.
Besides the Liver King.
Just the Liver King.
Right, just the Liver King. I have a friend in Austin who is not far from there, and I challenged her last week to get the local liver, and she did. They say the trick to that is freezing it and then pulling it out, slicing it. It kind of gives me a little gag right here. So I just do what I can. But if you can doctor it with some spices, if you're not bothered by spices, that's a great way to incorporate that for your family. And it's so healthy.
We were
Ladies, we are out of time here. You all are amazing. Let's go on the road together. Let's do the Lisa, Tara, and Natalie show.
I love it. It's been fun talking with you today. I can't believe it's already been an hour.
I know. Y'all are absolutely amazing. Beautiful spirits. Thank you for doing what you do. Hang the banner high that you are female farmers. You are encouraging people. Please stop worrying about farting cows. Get your kids the nutrients they need. In fact, there are studies. I have a son who's 6'3", who I probably I didn't know how important beef and meat was when he was in the growing stage and he, played high school football. I tell him all the time, had I just given you more meat, they're showing that kids during puberty, especially young men who are given more animal products, how they even grow taller. And, and my son's very fit and tall and all that. But I do think of, well, you can see it now. You can see the guy that Travis Barker, who Khloe Kardashian's married to, he's about this big, Oh, here's one more thing. Okay, I know I said we're out of town, but this is something I just recognized. So have y'all seen Smartless, the TV Netflix did something on the three guys who do Smartless, which is Will Arnett and Sean Hayes and Jason Bateman. And if you watched it, one of them was getting steak while Jason Bateman was eating. For one thing, he was eating all day, which your digestion needs a break. That's why we promote intermittent fasting. And number two, he was taking Tums all day, or Gas X. Why? Because he was eating plants all day. It's not farting cows, y'all. It's farting celebrities that we should be worried about. LA is one big fart city because they all think they need to eat these vegan diets, which all it does, if you're eating vegetables and your stomach distends, it's not working for you. That
and I love Jason Bateman, darn it.
I do too. But it doesn't happen with beef or cheese. Okay, yeah. I'm dropping the mic. We're done.
That was a good mic drop.
Thanks for having us, Lisa.
Thank you. Y'all are great. Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com.